Good afternoon, and welcome to the second program of the 2025 program year from the ACT-IAC Customer Experience Community of Interest. I'm Martha Doris, and I'll be your moderator for today's program. So last month we discussed the customer experience efforts of the Trump first administration, followed by a discussion of the Government Service Delivery Improvement Act. And over the past month, there's been many activities and a lot of changes in the name of creating greater efficiencies in the government. Many efficiencies can be gained through digitizing services and leveraging practices of customer experience. And so we wanted to bring some thinking, talking, discussing ideas to the community, given all of the activities caused a lot of uncertainty across the workforce in both government and industry. So I was talking to a friend of mine at DHS the other day, and he said many people don't think they do customer experience. But the truth of the matter is, if you deliver services, whether it's internally to employees or externally to customers, you deliver an experience. And so I think as we go through today's conversation, kind of keep that in mind in terms of how you're delivering service and how you can create efficiencies based on, we have opportunities right now to really break down some barriers that have held us back over time. So trying to look at this as opportunities. So we have a great group of panelists today. We've started our program year by the leadership in the CX COI, kind of giving you some perspectives, and then we'll have new programming starting next month from our program chair, who's Dominic Sale. So get ready. We're going to have some magic happen here today with our panelists. So why don't we start off with some introductions, and I'll turn it over to Lee Becker.
Thank you so much, Martha. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Good afternoon. It is my privilege to be the industry chair for the Customer Experience Community of Interest here at ACT-IAC. And, I'm really excited for this part two, as Martha shared. It's continuation conversation, and this is something we have as a COI leadership team has been thinking a lot about, and I know all of you as well. So a lot of questions. There's been a lot of great work in how agencies have been guiding, and we could talk more about it today. But bottom line, as Martha said, this is about making government more efficient and responsive to the people it serves, and that's frankly at the core of what CX is all about. That's frankly when I was at VA, and I know Eris as well. The VA team, so proud of them, but it was an efficiency issue that was the burning platform of why CX was even contemplated. The very fact that veterans did not have access to the care when they needed, it was a fundamental efficiency problem. So we see as a COI, we see this as so timely and such an opportunity in really aligning. And if many of you heard when Elon Musk was in the Oval Office, I mean, he was pointed directly at how important feedback loops are from the public. And he said that's critical to our democracy. I mean, he talked about closed loop feedbacks. Well, that's exactly what you need to make those rapid iterations, really make those efficiencies, those improvements based on what citizens really need. And that's what we need in government. I mean, that's frankly all of us as a community, we've been driving for. And frankly, there's opportunities for us to take it to the next level. I mean, there's absolutely, and this is something we're very excited about, we're excited to talk about. We need to have a government that is listening, that's acting and improves, and is frankly responsive to the American people. And that's what we're all pushing for. And I think what we'll do today is we're going to highlight those strategies that have been put in place in pockets. There's different maturities, as we know. VA is ahead of the pack because they started earlier, but as we know, VA was built in the first Trump administration and evolved to really be even more impactful. So we'll talk more about this. Bottom line, this is about driving smarter service delivery, improving efficiency, reducing waste, and building public trust. So enjoy. Please ask questions in the chat. We're going to have a lively conversation about this. We want your ideas. We want your thoughts. Where support's needed from the community perspective. And then at 1 o'clock, we're going to turn into an open forum. We'll stop the recording. We'll have an open forum to talk about a little more, even further, anything that the community has in mind, where we can deeper support as we go on with the programming that Dominic and the team has really been developing. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Lee. I'm going to go over to Amanda, but rather than just doing your introduction, why don't we go ahead and let you answer the first question about when we talk about customer experience strategies and practices, what does that mean to you? And we'll let everybody kind of run through that as they introduce themselves. Amanda.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda Chavez. I'm the Vice President for Customer Experience at New Axis. And what do customer experience strategies mean to me? I mean, Lee, you are such a tough act to follow, and I feel like Martha just did me dirty by having to go after you on this. I can't really say it any better. And what occurred to me as you were talking, Lee, was that I think those of us in the CX community have been saying some of these things for a really long time without using the word efficiency. Like when I think about CX and the value proposition that I'm always trying to pitch to not only customers, but I have spent plenty of time pitching this to internal stakeholders as well, is that if you don't want to have to rework, if you don't want to have to spend more hours of development, if you don't want to have to scrap something because it wasn't useful to the public, CX is a way to measure twice to cut once. And when I say measure twice, that can be really efficient too. It does not have to, these methods and strategies don't have to take a protracted amount of time if they are embedded into the services that we are delivering and the operations that we're using to deliver those services. So that's where I really see the value of CX and driving some of these efficiencies, because it's, again, we're couching it differently now, but that has always been part and parcel to the practice. So back to you, Martha.
Thanks, Amanda. Why don't we go over to Dominic?
Hi, everybody. So I have a slightly different take on this. I think efficiency is obviously hugely important. To me, though, the root is trust. And I think we are now in a place where the trust in government is very, very fragile. I think there's different ways of dealing with that. And one of the things we need to do is really root back to what are the core foundational elements of trust. For me, there are five main things. There's reliability. So we need consistency, dependability. Citizens know that government is going to deliver and they can rely on us being there. That's kind of the silent, like government is there behind the scenes. If we don't notice it, great, because they're doing what they need to do. Competence. When people need to have a sense that we know what we're doing inside government, that we're going to get the job done, that we have the right skills, knowledge, abilities. Three is integrity. And I think this is where government does very well today. Honest, ethical behavior, strong moral principles. I know all my friends in government really believe in the mission, are grounded in the Constitution, and that's why they're there. I know that's true for all the folks here on the panel and probably all of you out in the audience. Three is benevolence, having positive intent and genuinely caring. I think that's also where government, from my perspective, maybe not as perceived by the public, has done very well. And then open communication, transparency, honesty, that everything we do is out in the open. We're vulnerable. We can be called out if we do something wrong, and we accept that. We take accountability. Those are all the elements. I think where we have decided as a group to focus, because it's really foundational to building that experience, is this idea of efficiency, of effectiveness, of service that is responsive. So I think that's why we have, as a group, decided that is the element of trust, the element of CX that we're really going to double down on this year. We're getting that message loud and clear from the incoming administration. So I think that's where this is grounded, but I do not ever want to lose sight of the fact that that's just one of many elements that build trust in government for the public.
Thank you, Dominic. Over to you, Eris.
Good afternoon, everybody. Eris McCautry-Gill here, Managing Director at Deloitte and the industry lead for the Workforce Optimization/EX Working Group. And Amanda, I'm going to be in your boat. Following Dom, following all of you. I just want to say ditto what you all said. It's everything. And what I would add to it, trust is the first thing that came to mind for me as well. I think it's the underpinning of so much of what we do and talk about with CX. And the perspective that I will add on to everything that's been said is around the operational piece of it, because we know execution is important and foundational to really elevating the value and the impact of CX. And to me, part of what using a CX focused approach does, and putting it at the heart, is, as Lee mentioned, is it allows for prioritization. So there are so many things that we can start to tackle, talk about, want to work towards, but we can't boil the ocean at one time. And particularly as we are trying to look at how to rack and stack resources and what to divert where, we want to make sure that we're answering the right problems. We want to make sure that we are looking at the biggest pain points for those that we're serving, and what are the areas that we're knocking out of the park, so we make sure that we continue to provide a great level of service in those areas. So CX, to me, again, taking that feedback, but it's making sure that we are focusing our efforts in the areas that matter most, and in taking a very feedback focused approach, a CX approach. It allows us to do that without assuming. It allows us to do that without guessing. We have data and specific qualitative and quantitative insights that allow us to demonstrate why we are focusing efforts in a particular way. And to me, when you take that approach and you prioritize and anchor in that, you are looking at how to be most effective, because you're directing your resources in the way that matter at the most at that moment in time. You are also building trust with constituents, because we're tackling the issues that they've told us really resonate and matter the most to them. And the other piece to me that I have come to very much appreciate about CX is that it allows us to be dynamic. We are continuously evolving. Problems are continuously evolving, and CX keeps us up to speed with and having a pulse on what matters most at that point in time.
Thanks, Eris. Lee, I'm going to give you one more shot at it, since I kind of started off with just the introduction, and you got a little bit out there, but I want to make sure you've had your full say so if there's anything else that you wanted to talk about in this question.
Yeah, I think everyone on the panel has been so hit it head on of what this is all about. If I make just a point a little bit further, is I think this point of I know Amanda and others have shared this reducing rework, I think is a big piece that frankly in government, I know when I was doing, those of us have been in government, right? We have seen how the frustrating piece of getting the things done. I'll never forget this. I mean, there was a point in time, as you know, when I was at the Pentagon, where we would have a simple slide deck to get done, have 40, 50 turns on it. Talk about inefficiency, right? I mean, this is just internal side of it. So I think this is, and the VA, we had some of this as well, and we had to address some of this. But I think a lot of this also gets down to data. I think you have to have the data to do it, and I think the piece here for this incoming administration, and it's really important. And this is something I know VA, I know VA has, with Dr. Linda Davis, being appointed as a political to be the CXO, right? The Veterans Experience Officer at VA, I think is a huge, huge deal to understand how important the VA is seeing, this important work to continue, and the Secretary of VA of what it is. But if you listen to them and you listen to this administration and how they're looking at this, I think the key point here is CX cannot be something that we do as a research project. It has to be fundamental around the actual work. So as an example, with when you think about, like, for instance, the IRS as an example, they've saved 740 years of hours of hold time. That's an example where CX becomes, fundamental in how they actually get things done. There's examples like that, and we could talk more. We'll go, more into those examples. But I think the piece is doing it right the first time. It's not to do the rework. And I think I'll never forget when I talked to some of the leaders at VA and the National Cemetery Administration. One of the things, and this to me is frankly, when I think about CX, this is it. And I asked them, I was like, how do you? I don't know if the team knows this broadly, but National Cemetery Administration has the highest satisfaction for the families of how they are treated and served than any brand out there. Okay, higher than USAA, higher than Starbucks broadly. And if you ask the leaders why that is, and you ask any employee in that team why that is, they'll say, we have only one shot to get this right. And that's the culture. So everything is aligned around it. And that to me is the essence of CX. But you have to have the data to be able to actually, because then the question is like, am I getting it right? How do we know we're getting it right? Right? Those are the next pieces. And we could talk more about that too.
Thank you. I think as we're talking about this, I don't know how the audience feels, but you know, we've talked about a lot of the little components. I mean, to me, well, first of all, I would say I'm cleaning out my office, right? So I'm pulling out files from 2007 and 2008 with the GSA logo on it that says customer experience creates efficiencies in government, right? So we have been talking about efficiency for a long, long time. It's just that, you know, as different administrations come in, the focus will ebb and flow in different ways. But it's really about the way everything is done in the government because the public deserves the services that they need when they need them in a way that they want to get them via their channel of choice. And so it touches every aspect of an organization, which is why we're all over the place, right? Because it does touch everything. And the bottom line is we want to create trust in government. And let's be honest, right now, there's probably not a lot of trust in government both within the government or outside the government. And it's probably not the most popular topic right now, but that's sort of the honest truth. We're going through, you know, really, really uncertain times, both from a government employee perspective and the industry that supports it, as well as the public who is seeing and worried about some of their services being impacted and going away. And so what we want to do here is to help agencies think through and understand why what they do is so important. And it is really important. I mean, I think this, you know, we wanted to show our support for you know, the public sector workforce and the impact that all of this is having on everybody. It's not an easy time. So uh, this is our attempt to help you tell your story in a way that we think that this administration wants to hear the story. And it's not always easy to do. So with that, I'm going to say, go with the next question, which is that, you know, different agencies are at different levels of maturity. And we've talked a lot in our own COI about the maturity and what does that mean. And a lot of it depends on how long somebody's been focusing on the experience work, the resources that they've been given, the buy-in that they've gotten from leadership within their agency, and the commitment, and just that goes along with the resources. So, as agencies drive towards efficiency and effective service delivery, what are some of the best practices that you guys see? And we covered a few of them already, but that you see in terms of delivering efficient and effective services. Customer experience tools, practices, strategies are just the how we get there, right? But we are trying to deliver government services, both to employees and to the public. So, Lee, why don't you start us off with, you know, you being at VA, you and Eris, and being in this space for such a long time. We'll start with you.
Thank you so much. So this is I think it's a really critical point, and it should not be seen as you know, one agency is better than another or not in that way. And I think Martha, the way you kind of said that, you know, from a standpoint from maturity, and it's not, we understand that there's a gradient of it. And I think at the core of this, what we've seen as a criticality is how much, to me, like this is a very simple view, how well is fundamentally CX, how we approach this, hardwired within operations, within the fundamentals of an agency, whatever the core high impact services are. If it's not mature. And frankly, that agency is not efficient and that agency is not effective at the very core. And this is what we've learned from industry as we think about industry best practices. And this is what we've seen very clearly from the agencies that have done it and the agencies that haven't done it. So I think I think to me, that has to be rooted in. How do we kind of get out of that piece is fundamentally it's leadership. And it's leadership making a commitment because it is disruptive. CX done right is disruptive. And frankly, it's a great disruption because it's all about the American people. It's all about who we're serving. And I think, frankly, is also what it does is it's a great equalizer because as we think about an agency, right, there's so many different silos that happens. And this is one of the lessons we've learned at VA, where everyone says, we're here for the veteran. We're here for the veteran. We're here for the. So you have hundreds of entities saying we're here for the veteran. The veteran, this was happening when I said in the early days. The veteran's looking up is like, oh my God, I'm so confused. It is so hard. How do I navigate this? Everyone's saying they're here for the veteran, but I can't even get the VA to pick up the phone. That's how it was when we first started. And so with the VA, with the leadership commitment of Bob McDonald, and then transition with Dr. Davis coming in the first Trump administration, right? And then with the team, the leadership team, Robert Wilkie, Pam Powers, the team, they essentially said what it is, it's about the veteran. So we could have hundreds of entities. The question then becomes is, what does the veteran need, right? And how do we build it back from there? And that to me takes, I'll tell you, it takes a lot of, I think that's where the leadership piece comes in. And also I would have to say is that's where the data piece comes in, because if you don't know, you could say, oh yeah, we're here for our farmers. We're here for, students, whatever that is. But where it becomes really actionable is when you're able to baseline to understand, okay, what is the level of services that we're providing to the American people? Not what the agency thinks, what do the people that are actually getting the service think, and then work back from there. And that's, I think, how you build the maturity. And we've seen that very exact playbook is what the VA did. That's what they did.
So Lee, I think to summarize that, it's putting your customer in the center, right? Starting with your customer and working backward in terms of input, getting feedback, understanding them, and so on. So I'm going to move over to Eris.
I'm going to add one more piece to what you were talking about, Lee. When you talk about the data and the systems, I'm going to add in the people. So when folks come to utilize services, if it's veterans or folks who might need Social Security or Medicare payments or services from their local park service, they generally will engage with an agency or an organization through a digital tool and or connecting with someone who can help provide that service. And keeping tech and people as part of this discussion is such a critical piece of it. And that's something that we started to work towards as we matured. We didn't start there. The conversation was always there. I will acknowledge that there was always a conversation around the impact and the importance of the workforce in terms of elevating CX. But it took us a while to grow into maturing that piece of it as well. And so there were a couple things that came to mind when you asked that question. And one of them was to be agile. Part of CX is not waiting to build out the grand, big version of everything. It's how do you create a minimally viable product that can address the mail? That, again, to the point about feedback that Lee made at the top of the discussion, take in that feedback, tweak, and then roll it out so that by the time you're scaling, you have something that is very effective, wanted, needed, and helpful in the workplace, in the environment, and that's helpful to delivering those services. And the other thing that I would share is that a lot of folks look at the organizations that have reached a higher level of maturity, but we all have to start somewhere. And that might mean you have 100 people. It might mean you have an army of one that is out there doing everything that they can. But brick by brick, that's the counsel that I would give. All of these efforts don't blow up overnight, or when I say blow up in a good way, they don't just mature overnight. They take time, they take effort, they take intentionality, they take a lot of grit, dedication, and sometimes putting on a bit of armor, to be very transparent, because it's not always an easy road. And so I think looking at where you are and seeing what you can do, and not getting discouraged by kind of the 10 paces down the road where you might want to be, but really looking at what impact you can make with what you have, is something to keep in mind. And then how do we leverage and learn from each other? That is one thing that I observed throughout my time, both at VA and GSA, is that the federal community is a special one. It is one where sharing means caring, and where a rising tide truly does lift all boats. And when we work together, ask questions across agency lines, when we connect with each other, and again, I'm going to go back to people and tech. It's people calling each other saying, hey, this is what we're trying to do. How can we help accelerate this effort? How can we help avoid recreating? We talked about rework, recreating the wheel. If you've already done that, agency A, and I'm a couple paces behind you, how can I learn from what you've done? How can I avoid some of the pitfalls that you might have fallen into? And so we learned a lot from industry. When I say we at VA, we learned a lot from industry, since we were kind of at the beginning of that. But I would also offer, as we matured, there was a reach back to say, how can we help other agencies that are coming along this journey, so that everybody is not having to go through the same things over and over again? And that speaks to efficiencies. So, I think there's a lot that we can learn from all of our stories. I think there's a lot that we can do to help. And y'all forgive me, I still say we, the federal community will always be deep in here. But there's so much that we can do to support both advancing, because I don't know anybody, I would venture to say, all of us here are invested in the services that are being provided in the best way to the American public. And there are opportunities to do things better, to do things faster. And in doing that, and finding those pockets and finding those opportunities and coming up with those suggestions, that's where we come back to that total experience. It takes technology, it takes people, it takes CX. And so I think continuing to have those conversations broadly and sharing what we learn has been key.
Thanks, Eris. Just a couple points I want to highlight that you brought up. One is, the importance of the workforce, right? The workforce is, people are going to have to restructure offices. We've heard of people losing 30 and 40% of their workforce in their organizations. And so how does a leader pick up the pieces and decide, how they're going to continue to get things done? And the other thing is, we all have to admit there are ways to do things better, and there are things that we have done over time because that's the way it's always been done, and we think it's the only way to do it. But we've seen that there's rules don't always apply. So you can try to figure out how to get to those world-class services in different ways. But the workforce, it goes down to productivity and efficiency, not to mention just the humanity part of it, right? But it is more efficient if you have a productive workforce. So why don't we go over to Dominic?
Yeah, thanks. So I can't help but keep on thinking in this discussion that we're talking about efficiency, but really what we come back to effectiveness. Efficiency is an equation, right? It's something over something. It's some product over a cost. And I think this is something as a government we're just not good at this. And I think we tend to want to throw money at problems, and to the detriment of really trying to find more cheaper ways to do things incrementally. And I know it's a bit of heresy. I'm just going to put this out there. Like, VA has definitely increased their effectiveness. VA is an early leader in customer experience. They've made all the right investments from my perspective, like done a great job. But VA's budget has grown by 70% over the past decade. I'm not saying there aren't other factors involved, and I'm not saying that we haven't right-sized it versus it being underfunded in the past. But in terms of being more efficient, I don't know that we can accurately, perhaps there's data out there to show that the agency has become more efficient, is doing more per dollar than it did in the past. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that if we talk about efficiency, I don't think when I was in government that we did a good job of measuring that. I'll give you an example. Websites. We have tons of websites out there They cost X number of dollars. I know I was responsible for many myself. They're costly to maintain. Very rarely or almost never did we calculate the cost per transaction or the cost per click. We need to create these metrics and really measure and baseline those across the board and drive behaviors based on those. Because then in government, if we set kind of the baseline or what is normal, what's acceptable in terms of how much a website should cost per transaction, then we can start making those investments the right way. And one of those areas, I'm going to give a plug for my former agency, GSA, is to leverage those shared capabilities across the government. And I think, again, it feels like it's optional in a lot of agencies to use some of these services, or there's certainly some let's look at login.gov. Like there's always a debate by an agency whether we should use login or not. I don't know that the numbers or the dollars and cents always make sense from an individual agency perspective. We need to act like a cohesive whole, like an enterprise as a government, and make decisions. Are we going all in on login? Should an agency be spending money on a separate contract for authentication? Again, I know there's differences in opinion. I know I'm biased on the specific issue, and I know login has a lot to overcome in terms of service levels and trust that is built. But these are the areas where I think we really can gain efficiencies if at the program level, if the agency budget level, we're pushing the needle to specific metrics of efficiency. And in that case, maybe it's a cost per authentication. So I think we really need to get this discipline from the private sector into government. Obviously, the writing's on the wall. We need to demonstrate we're being efficient, and we can't do that if we don't have clear metrics and are holding and being held accountable at the agency level and at the program level and driving those correct behaviors. Because otherwise, we'll just get in the habit of just asking for more money, saying we don't have enough to get the job done, but not being honest and open with ourselves and the public as to why we can't do it for less.
Thanks, Dominic. Why do you think it's so difficult for agencies to capture that efficiency or measure that?
I think we tend to believe that there's this amount of money out there, and if we just ask for it and we demonstrate the need, we're going to get it. And I don't think as a government, we historically have that business discipline. There's no profit motive in government, right? And in corporate America, profit is the bottom line. Everything drives to that. What I love about government is that's not how it operates, but it's got to be part of how we operate. We've got to demonstrate that we're being fiscally responsible. And I don't think those pieces are in place as well as they could be. And if we look at the equation, right, for building trust, we're overfactored, or we're really investing in like the experience and a lot of those factors where we have underinvested, from my perspective, and I definitely invite disagreement on this. I think we've underinvested in that, like really measuring and driving those efficient metrics across the board as part of that building trust, right? We're losing trust when the public perceives we're spending too much. So how do we demonstrate to the public, no, here's the data shows that we are only spending, we're on par with commercial practices on the cost per transaction on a website, for example. That's the area where getting that business discipline in place is going to be critical for rebuilding that trust down the line.
Thanks. I also think that agencies, like capturing the cost of a website or contact center, it's spread all over an agency. Pieces are all over the place, so nobody ever takes the time to pull all the costs together so that you can actually say that you have, the cost of something. I mean, some of it's divided between communications, IT, programs, and everybody's kicking in a little bit of it. So I think that that's part of it. Lee, and then we'll finish up with Amanda.
Yeah, just so when I wanted to, if I could maybe respond to some Dominic was mentioning about the VA from the efficiency perspective and the growth. So a couple things just for everyone to be aware. I think there's opportunities for to be efficient in every single agency. I think even a step higher. I think there's an opportunity as we look at it from a macro perspective, what is at the very core of the services that government should be providing? And then looking, because frankly, there is duplication across multiple agencies around various tasks to do. Again, all well-meaning. And it's also because it's being looked at through the line item. I'll never forget this when we were doing the cross-agency journey work around the first Trump administration. And one of the first project was around the transition from a service member from the military to civilian life. And when we did that work, I'll never forget this, we talked to the OMB, the budget leads on the B side of OMB, and we showed them the moments that matter of that journey, and to think through how do we reimagine the budgeting process, right, to support this. I will never, the feeling that I had was, and I felt bad, and we kind of worked through that, they didn't know how to answer that question, because the way the appropriations are set up is not aligned to the ultimate way how we should be providing that service. I mean, think of it as that. I mean, as a result, there's inherently built-in inefficiencies in the process. And I think, so the question becomes is like, how do we address that, on those aspects? And this is at the core of why CX is so important, because through CX, you're able to find where those opportunities are, that we can actually move some of those macro levers to be able to do that. I also want to put a quick fine point in some elements of VA that I saw. Through feedback, being able to get the data, the VA was able to reduce the no-show rates for veterans accessing care. And as a result, it equated to $1 billion in cost avoidance. Probably don't hear it on the news. That's an example of how CX can actually help move the needle. The very fact that, to your point, the budget increased, but also at the same time, we're not telling the story as well. It's not being shared. And we need to probably think about how does government agencies tell that story? 25% over the past number of years, as trust has increased, VA has served more than 25% more veterans have registered and into the system and using VA. Like, those are the pieces that are not. And so I think it's a question. I think the question is right now, as we have this opportunity from a broad government perspective, how can CX be, we all believe this, is the answer to be able to find out how do we move the macro elements to make truly government more efficient, more effective for the public.
Yeah, I just want to ride on Lee's point. This is not an issue of federal employees not caring about efficiency. There are systemic issues here, and it comes down from the Hill, comes down with how we appropriate, how the Hill understands oversight, and how those appropriations have downstream impacts. Those are the things we should focus on to make systemic changes to make it possible to even have this conversation in the future. Because if the right incentive structure isn't in place, we can bang our heads against the wall all day long, and nothing's going to change until everyone has alignment on the importance of efficiency and what that means.
Thanks, Dom and Lee. Amanda, over to you. We're still on the question about, how does design, actually impact or enable, the government to actually meet the needs of service of their customers?
And I actually have an answer directly to that question. And I want to tie back to something that Dom mentioned about, the businesses versus how the government operates. I rarely get to pull this out, so thank you all for the opportunity. But my master's is in public administration, and what I learned, while pursuing it, was that government was designed to be slow and inefficient, so that we could, through a series of checks and balances, that we could make thoughtful decisions. That's really not the way the world works anymore. That was created, 250 years ago. Nobody could have anticipated the proliferation of technology and the way that it has, to borrow from earlier language, the way that it's completely disrupted our lives. And I mean, that's not just coming from DOGE, like the demand for things to move faster. That's coming from, like, me, private citizen Amanda. Like, I go on to, this is a very tired example, but no less true. I go on Amazon, click a button. It already it suggests to me, based on previous purchases, what I would like to, what I might be interested in the future. And I can have it to my door in 2 days, right? That is our expectation, because we are all agnostic of what flags we carry during, 8 hours or more of the day, we're all at the end of it, private citizens having those interactions. So customer experience is what, in that last example that I used of Amazon, customer experience is how you get there. And it is, again, it's been said here too, it is a business discipline. And if we're talking about how design affects that, the Design Management Institute comes up every so often. They publish their design value index. Consistently over a decade, the Standards & Poor 500, the companies that are design driven, experience driven companies outperform the rest of the companies on that list of 500. The top ones that are design led outperform them by 228%. That is a business metric that I think, we can all get behind. We all agree that some of this disruption needs to happen and that we have to change things. Design is a very powerful tool to help you get there. Back to the comment that I made about measuring twice to cut once. How can you design something like AI is everywhere, right? And I have seen it misused. You all have. Every single one of us on this call has seen it misused and put in, just because it's a thing that people want to put in. You have to have intention behind that. You have to know how people are going to use it, how citizens are going to use it, how the employees who are facilitating it are going to use it. That has to be looked at first. Design has a lot of methods to help enable that quickly so that you can add AI meaningfully and it will help you achieve the outcome that you're aiming for. So design, I think, has a real place in this because number one, it drives that business value that we're talking about. And it also helps to make sure that you are putting the right solution in, not just putting a solution in for the sake of it.
Thanks, Amanda. I think we're going to pivot a little bit and try to, we could go through a number of examples that we've talked about in the past around, VA improving trust or DHS saving 21 million, burden hours, to their customers. There's numerous examples of the improvements that we've made, but I wanted to also talk about what happens when we don't. I mean, there are example after example after example of, things that have been built that have cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and we don't have anything to show for it, or it's not operating the way we want because either it wasn't built right, didn't have users' involvement when it was being built. Is there who's willing to like stand up and talk about some of these? I mean, I know during COVID there were like 2,500 web pages that had COVID information on it. If that's not a, lack of consolidation and a lot of duplication, I don't know what is. But Lee.
Yeah, so happy to do that. So when I was at DoD, so I'll give a DoD an example and a VA example, and then there's many others. Last time we talked about the Boeing example too. But DoD, the one thing that sticks out to me is the Dimers project. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with that. Dimers was a big initiative at the Pentagon where we were trying to, as every military service has their own personnel system, this was something that was supposed to be this kind of monolithic system that was able to really have a one source of truth, right? Of who are the ones that are serving in the military, right? And be able to do that and be able to, the idea was, of course, great idea, right? Billions of dollars later, nothing to show for it. And finally, it was put on a shelf. I'll never forget that because during that time, there was a system called on the Marine Corps side, MCTIFs, Marine Corps Total Force System, which was an incredible system. Incredible. It worked amazingly. Why? That's another thing. Why is because at the field level, at the unit level, not sure if we have any Marines here, so hoorah to you. But at the Marine level, you had the ability for the admin chief to actually address and fix the issues, the administrative issues that Marines were going through. By the way, no surprise that the fact that the Marines, I don't know if you'll saw this, the Marine Corps is passed their audit that they had for the first time. So I think that's another exemplar that DoD could look at Marine Corps and say, oh, well, wow, you were able to pass audit. How did that happen? So that DoD is not in that situation like that. There's a lot, but I'll never forget the people would say, oh, that's the Marine Corps They're smaller, nimbler. That's not going to work for DoD as a whole. So that was one. I'll never forget that piece. But it gets to how do you, being able to listen to and where things are working and use that as an opportunity to grow. And frankly, as the Dimers project should have never, after to what Eris was saying about Agile, it should have probably repivoted a couple months into it. Okay, another one, VA, and this is going on right now. It's the reality of the electronic health record. And I have so much love for VA. I get it. I know EHR is really, really hard, but I'll tell you, there's a lesson here in the sense that a couple of years ago, we were getting feedback that veterans were being harmed as a result of some of the implementation that was going on, okay, at the ground level. I'm going to try to, long story short, VEO, and credit to the Veterans Experience Office, they identified some of the CX gaps and they used it. They used data to help make the case, hey, we probably need to pause this for a second, okay, and kind of let's circle the wagons a bit. And again, it's more complicated than that. But that's an example of where VA said, okay, it's not working. We're seeing the data. It's not working. Let's put a pause on this and let's recalibrate. And as a result, there's some key milestones that needs to happen to get that back on track. That's something we need to be, I know there's a lot of attention on that, of course, for the VA. But I think that's an opportunity to potentially look at, again, what has not gone. And then again, I think the fact that VA has a CX capability, I think prevented that program going on and on and on without some recalibration. So that's, I think, a great example. And kudos to the VA VEO team and VHA team for helping to recalibrate. And again, we need to see how that evolves.
Thanks, Lee. I mean, I know that, we've talked a little bit about, you mentioned Boeing in terms of when you don't listen to your employees and there's things that happen, and in hindsight, employees knew all about it, right? And that's been proven, at NASA, at Boeing, because people are not given the way to communicate or taken seriously when they know that there are imperfections or things that are not being done right. I mean, even in terms of wartime, there's examples of, people on the battlefield know what's going on more than the people in the Pentagon, right? Or in the White House. So, it's
real talk.
Exactly. So I think the point here, and we can, paint all the disasters that we can think of, but using and thinking through within your agencies, what happens when we don't do this, right? How can we, even using, design and not doing rework because you've used people in the process of design. Amanda.
I mean, Lee, when you were mentioning that example, that was the first one that was popping into my head. I mean, another one, which, there's a few companies on this call who literally got on the map for this. The original rollout of the Affordable Care Act website. I mean, that is when I'm talking to customers about the value of CX and why you want to use it, and what happens if you don't. That's literally one of the worst case scenarios, right? Where you as a leader of a government agency get, splashed all over the front page of the Washington Post and make international headlines for all the wrong reasons. And that is a wrenching prospect to think about. And, there's a lot of success stories literally represented from some of the participants on this call today who were able to go in, watch the launch of that website fail, go in, use CX best practices, design-driven best practices to, relaunch that website and make it useful for citizens, make it easy and accessible for citizens to be able to, for some people to be able to get insurance for the first time in their lives. So, but you don't want to have it as part of the cleanup crew. That's not where you want to add CX. You want to, again, use it at the front end so that you can prevent those kinds of disasters.
Thanks, Amanda. I mean, even as simple as not communicating that your services are available to the customers that you're serving, or using communications to nudge people through the process, will keep them from adopting a benefit or taking advantage of something that they're eligible for. And then you've wasted a lot of money building things that are not getting the take up that you originally or that you hoped for. I'm going to shift a little bit over to Eris to kick us off on, the workforce optimization issues and the connection. We've talked about that a little bit, but I wanted to make sure we fully covered the workforce issues and the connection between efficient and effective, modern government services.
Well, thank you for that, Martha, and for recognizing the importance that the workforce has in all of this. The workforce today looks very different than the workforce from 6 months ago, and it will likely look different 3 months from now. And so I think we are in a space where, and the point was made earlier, given where we are and the direction that we've been headed, we have to think about how we work differently. I also think as we are discussing how to work differently, how to operate differently, we have to take a moment to acknowledge where people are. So much innovation comes from ideas that people have, to the points made earlier, because they are the ones on the ground, because they are interacting with those who are receiving services, and they know what customer needs are. And I shared this on the last discussion that we had, where when you have an engaged workforce, 70% of them know what customer needs are. They can tell you what folks are sharing, what they're saying that they need. And so there's a critical piece to co-designing with the workforce to create the most effective and efficient systems for service delivery. And again, would be remiss if I just did not take a moment to say that in all of that is still empathy. There is still human connection that is required as we are figuring these things out, because they're questions that everyone's trying to answer. Leaders don't have all of the answers either. There's still a level of trying to figure some of these things out, but we're figuring them out together. And so I think as we are talking about the increased importance, visibility, and technology has always been a critical piece of this. I think we're seeing it elevated even more now, but I think it's incumbent upon all of us to recognize that it is not in lieu of, it is in complement with the workforce that is here. Essential government services will still be delivered through technology and people. And so how do we now, with the workforce that is there, how do we equip them to be able to apply these new technologies in a way that both upskills them, that prepares them to be the most effective and the best at all that they are doing, and do it in a way that allows them to be successful, that allows them to be healthy. And that will take time. We are running the marathon, y'all. This is not going to happen overnight. There are going to be phases that we go through. And I think we have to, again, acknowledge where people are and what they're going through, and work together to figure out how we adjust, how we recognize what the new normal is, to be quite frank. What that's still changing too. And talking to people and as in leadership is such a big piece of this, and connection is such a big piece of this. And when we talk about the influence that each person has, yes, there are things that are going to happen organizationally. There are things that are going to happen at an aggregate enterprise level. But I also just want to emphasize that there are interactions that we can have every day, and how we treat each other every day also has a significant impact on what this looks like. So even some of the things that might seem small, the email that says, how you doing? The discussion that says, hey, I know you're working on this project and you now have to do it differently than you thought you were going to have to do it 2 weeks ago. How can I help? Those little actions also help to advance all that's happening in the work, and it helps to provide levels of support that the workforce might need. So I appreciate you all keeping people as part of this conversation, because they really are still very much, in my opinion, at part of it.
Thanks, Eris. And I think, a couple points, essential government services are going to be delivered through technology and people, right? It looks a little different today than it did a month ago, but that's still the case. Lee, did you have something?
Just foot stomping of what Eris was saying. I think this is and I know that may seem there's a contradiction of how things are happening. But the reality is that if the people are not, if the core of public service is the people, and that's going to have to be critical. Now, I do think that this is where Eris and the team to work around workforce optimization. I think there's an opportunity to reimagine of how we work, and that to me has to be core. I was talking to one of the senior executive that runs a very large benefits program, and he's like, yes, he understands. I know. He's like, it's tough, it's hard decisions are being made, but he's actually leaning in, and he is actually putting his arms around his people to say how important they are in this new way and opportunity of working, because those very employees have been frustrated with the inefficiencies that they did not have control over. Think of it for a second. These are dedicated government employees that have been trying to fight the machine and fix certain policies and processes that were making it hard for them to work. And when I think of the workforce optimization, as Eris is sharing, is that this is, to me, it's a call to action for public servants, because they have been struggling to get basic tasks done because of the barriers that they've had, whether it's technology barriers, systems barriers, frankly, maybe, and it's a very small percentage, but perhaps their fellow employee that has been not performing. I'll tell you, that's one of the most, that is a morale degrader when you have someone, everyone knows, oh, this person is a slacker, and maybe they need to find another mission, they need to. So it's those, and this kind of excites me. And I think to me, the fact that we have senior executives amidst everything going on, putting their arms around employees, saying, listen, let's seize the moment and let's find ways, because I can't do this without you. Okay, I'm putting the justifications in, I'm making it, but let's be very, very honest. What's working, what's not working, let's stop what's not working, let's double down what's working. And as a result, the outcomes will come as a result of what is ideal. So I think that really inspired me to even hear that some of these leaders are saying this in that way.
Thanks, Lee. Amanda.
First off, I want to say I do love following Lee on this one, because Lee is one of the most measured people I know. I love seeing Lee getting all fired up over there. And I am going to maybe share an unpopular opinion with regards to, how, because you said something, Lee, that made me think of this, about leaning into this, not only for, I mean, it's brutal out there, right? Like, we're all like absorbing the shock from, our colleagues and our federal counterparts, and it's very real, right? There's a lot of change that's happening right now that people don't feel a part of. I had a really amazing conversation yesterday with a senior executive from the government who didn't want to be identified, but I want to share some of the things that he told me, because I think it's a very valuable reframe. And this is where I'm saying it might not be popular, but I don't care, because I think it was one of the most useful things that I have heard recently. And he said to me, the perception is that DOGE is coming in and saying, you're stupid, you're worthless, you don't matter, the work that you've done is trash. And so how is, what's the natural response as a human to the perception of feeling attacked? You get defensive right back. And you start, when these folks come in, you say to DOGE, or at least maybe you're not saying it, but this might be the feeling that's coming back. You're stupid, you're worthless, you don't matter. What are you doing here? And what this senior executive said to me, I think, was just really amazing, because when he said that, I'm like, oh, yeah, it's just humans on both sides of this, right? It's just humans. And ostensibly working towards the same goal, like you mentioned, Lee. Those of us who have been in and around the government for this long know exactly what you're talking about, Lee. And we all have our own stories about where we would, put in efficiencies. So his suggestion was to, number one, when DOGE comes in, like, meet them as humans, and also, but be prepared and think through, what is your value proposition? What is your department's unique value proposition? And back it up with some of the numbers that Dom, you were talking about earlier, like where you have reduced waste, fraud, and abuse, and what are the numbers that back that up? And then come to them with a list of 10 things that, inefficiencies that you would like to see changed, and 10 solutions for how you can get there. What that senior executive said to me was partnership. And it does not matter. In my opinion, I think we're past the part where, we have to like pretend that some of this doesn't hurt and that some of this is, really disruptive. We're past that part. But we're not, like, the thing that's going to be immutable over time is that we're all just humans trying to do this. So if we meet Doge as humans and come prepared and work as partners, perhaps this might go, we don't know, but perhaps it might go a little differently.
Well, the last question was about, recommendations to leaders in the government on how to navigate these times. So I think Lee and Amanda have already given us their answer. Dominic, did you have something?
Well, I guess I'll mash up the last in this question then, and I would say I agree with what Amanda is talking about, right? We can only control that which we can control. There is a force coming into government. We have to assume that they want government to work better, and that they want to rebuild trust in government as well. I think we may come at it from different angles on how to accomplish that, or in what kind of way we want to accomplish that, and what we want the end result to be. But I do think that if I were to give advice to the incoming administration and truly they want a more impactful, more trustworthy government, we have to work on this aspect of empowering the employees, trusting the employees, nurturing an environment where open, honest, transparent communication, whether we agree with it or not, is the norm, is standard, because the system won't work if that doesn't happen, right? The system will fall apart. When you get to the point where people are afraid to speak up, where they feel like if they give their opinion, they're going to lose their job or they'll be marginalized, then you're not getting the best ideas, you're not getting the innovation, and just for the benefit of the government, for the functioning of the government, for the efficiency, for the effectiveness, your best ideas are going to come from inside. This is good business practice. You read Harvard Business Review, you see all the case studies about it, and you also see the examples of where the breakdown in that internal communications and the breakdown in trust causes a system to collapse. You got Avianca flights in Colombia where the crew was afraid to speak up to the pilot and the plane crashed because they were afraid to overrule the pilot of the plane. Stalin, he was on his deathbed. His folks saw him dying. They were afraid to tell him or call a doctor because they thought if they saw a doctor and he came through, he would kill them. We have to create an environment where there is safe, open communications. Where's that feedback loop where we can be vulnerable? Maybe we're not there now, but that should be the end goal. If we're truly worried, want to have a more trusted, effective government, that's what we really need to focus in on. And the competence, and the integrity, and the benevolence, and the reliability, all those things. So you can't have trust in government without all those 5 factors in place. So.
Thanks, Dominic. Eris, we'll give you the last word.
I totally agree. I don't know if we have any Ted Lasso fans out there, but be curious, not judgmental. That's what comes to mind. There is so much here that we have talked about, and I will always put out there, ask questions and be open, because none of us have all of the answers. None of us know everything. And to the points that were just made, we need everybody to move this big ship forward. And I think when we come in and look at and ask questions about if all of our end goal is to help provide better services, we are differing potentially in how we get there. But I think if we stay focused on that true north and we determine that's where we're all headed, let's talk about what we've learned, the best ways to get there, and come to it with an open mind, with a level of professional respect for experiences that are being brought, diverse perspectives that are being brought into the conversation. I think that will help us move towards progress a lot faster than if we have, a lot of the tensions that we are seeing now, and recognize that's going to take some time. That's the other thing. Again, I know I said we're running the marathon earlier, but I really do believe that to be the case. We've got to work through where we are. Disruption is hard. Change is hard. And we heard, Lee, I think you mentioned it, the storytelling around it. How's the communication? Communication is such a big piece of this. And I go back to, and Dom, I thank you for kind of wrapping up. I mean, I just want to say ditto everything you all have said. But when we talk to people and we bring them into the process with us, when we tell them, here's what's happening, let me get your thoughts. You know what's been happening. Let's get your feedback. How can we make you a part of this process? Coming back to people, asking them questions, and also introducing new ways of doing things, the new technology that's coming in. Sometimes there's resistance to that because people just don't know. And sometimes it's also because taking the time can sometimes feel like a luxury. But that investment of time on the front end, acknowledge the fears that people may have around the disruption, to talk through how it might help them instead of hurting, acknowledging where it might cause some growing pains, if you will. All of those pieces are important. But I think the point about having open communication and creating the environment where people can ask questions, where people can share the concerns, the hopes, the fears that they have, and really doing it together is the only way that we're going to be able to move forward in a way that provides all of the services in the way that those who receive the services deserve.
Thanks, Eris. So I appreciate the panel today and everybody who attended. I think we'll stop the recording and then stick around and answer some of the questions on the chat, or if anybody has any other questions. I think